Hi, I'm Barbara Lucas, and welcome to the Green Room, where we explore the environmental topics that green up our world. In the last 30 years, southern Lower Michigan has seen a 500% rise in the number of white-tailed deer. Estimates are that there are now 1 deer for every 14 humans in Washtenaw County. Is this okay or not? If not, what can be done about it? Our guest today is Bernie Banet, a member of Washtenaw Citizens for Ecological Balance. Bernie, welcome to the show.
Hi, Barbara.
So tell me, what is the goal of Washtenaw Citizens for Ecological Balance?
Well, WC4EB, as we call it, has the goal of trying to attend to the fact that if we let one species thrive and multiply without limit, this can be very damaging to other species and to the whole natural environment, and deer fit that category at the moment.
Now, not everyone is in agreement that something needs to be done about deer. So let's just sort of brainstorm. Now, and I have a little background in that I did an interview, a radio show where I interviewed a whole bunch of different people about their attitudes about deer, and I was amazed how, even though each one of them was a nature lover in their own right, they were very passionate on different sides of this complex issue. So we're just going to throw out some various different perspectives. So tell me, why would somebody not want to do anything about the abundance of deer?
Some people don't see a problem. They don't see the damage to the whole ecosystem that deer can do. They don't see the danger to human safety on the roads. They aren't concerned with tick-borne diseases like Lyme disease, and they haven't seen the problem perhaps in their own backyards, and
they don't want taxpayer money being spent on.
Some people are simply unconvinced. I understand that.
And they might think that it's a matter of tulips, you know, certain landscape plants need to be protected, whereas your group is more interested in the whole web of life.
Some of us have suburban type gardens and yards and woods, and we are concerned about our own plants, but we've become educated about the much more general threat that overabundant deer do pose to our natural areas.
And then there's some people that feel that deer are just simply too beautiful. They're a species that we, just want to keep around.
They're beautiful, they're cute, they make us feel good, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And maybe deer were here first?
Some say that in some sense. Of course they were, but I've lived in Ann Arbor for 50 years. I moved here when I was 20. I don't remember seeing deer in the city as we have them now, except starting maybe 5 years ago. I mean, it's certainly in my neighborhood, which is Ann Arbor Hills, we just did not have deer wandering around. This is a new phenomenon in the city.
Mm-hmm. And then there's animal rights advocates that say every soul has a right to live. Maybe they're vegans, they might not, eat meat or wear leather shoes or whatever. And then there's also, I was surprised when I interviewed people, there's hunters that don't want deer management because they want the resource kept. They want to be able to hunt easily and nearby, and so they don't want to see sharpshooters or whatever.
Yes, although when we're talking about developed areas, typically these are off limits to hunting.
Okay.
So there's not that conflict usually.
And then you hear the argument that deer will just come in from outlying areas.
Oh, the vacuum effect.
Okay.
Right. There's a theory that if you reduce the deer population, however you do it, that more will simply come in. And I suppose that may happen. Bucks, tend to wander off and explore new territory. Does don't go as far. But the deer are reasonably territorial, and most of the experiences I've read about where the deer were reduced in population one way or another have not been overrun by deer coming in. Now we do have deer coming into the city that weren't here before, but they're drawn by the the beautiful salad bar that we offer them in our landscaping around our homes in places like Ann Arbor.
It does speak to the concept that perhaps this has to be done regionally, that you can't have just one community in isolation, that it needs to be, and it sounds like it is. You've been doing a lot of research over the past 4 years, or as you'd like to point out, you're not a researcher, but you have gathered information.
Exactly.
And have posted it on the wc4eb.org website. So I'd like to talk about some of that. It shows, that website shows that this is going on all over the country. So let's talk about some of the different reasons that we would do something. For instance, the rapid growth curve.
Oh yes, deer left unchecked, without predators, without hunters, multiply very rapidly. I think they would double in population in less than 2 years. I mean, they really grow rapidly, and that's a very fundamental part of our problem in cities and townships where hunting is prohibited or limited. And of course, we don't have wolves and bears wandering around, which would have kept them in a natural balance without human intervention. So that's the basic problem as far as the growth rate. And if we don't stop the growth, it simply will get worse and worse and worse fairly quickly.
And the main predator now is?
Well, the humans, of course, have replaced the wolves, and hunters do manage the population of deer. In Michigan, 350 to 400,000 deer are harvested every year by hunters, and the venison is used as food for humans. And that's how we manage the deer, except in areas like our cities where we're too densely populated to feel comfortable permitting the normal kind of recreational hunting that you would do up in the North Woods.
So what I was alluding to is the metal predator, the cars.
Those kind of predators, whoops, well, yes.
Well, hunters too. But,
well, hunters, I mean, really, hunters are a kind of predator. Yes, we also do take out some deer with our vehicles, to the detriment of the deer, the people, the cars.
Yeah. So
Absolutely.
Reasoning for action is that we don't want the predator to be a car. It's an unfortunate situation all around.
I don't think anybody thinks it's a wonderful thing to limit the deer population with our vehicles, right?
Because I've heard that we shouldn't hunt because it creates orphans. I guess cars do too. Deer in large numbers are not a natural thing, but you did mention that they're responding to an unnatural situation with the kind of environment, the mosaic of different, the cover and then the grazing area. So that is a reason for action.
Yes, they like our developed areas, our suburbs, and our neighborhoods, even in the city of Ann Arbor. Give them that mix of cover and open land and the right vegetation where they can really thrive. And without predators, hunters, and so on, they do.
I've seen a map of the car collisions in the Washtenaw County area. It's quite intense in terms
Isn't that amazing?
How many. I just couldn't believe it.
Over a 10-year period or so, there's no area of the map that doesn't have a car crash on it.
Yeah. And apparently, according to the Michigan Insurance Institute of Michigan, 12 people in 2013, I guess. So
in the state.
Yeah.
That's a sobering statistic.
Yeah.
These are real human lives that are lost, right?
And then there's diseases.
Yes, the deer have their own diseases if the population is too dense. But also, when they reach a certain density, it seems that tick-borne diseases, famously Lyme disease, can become a problem. In Washtenaw County, yet we're not convinced that we have local presence of Lyme. Of course, our residents get it when they go
Travel.
elsewhere. It's a serious problem, a really nasty, can be recurrent type disease that we don't always catch in time and so on. I have a couple of relatives with it from Pennsylvania. One of the things motivating me to do something about getting educated about deer.
And people are saying that we should just fence our gardens or whatever, and there's pros and cons to fencing.
Well, you can protect an area with fences. You need a tall fence, right? Like a 10-foot fence, which city ordinances probably won't permit. They're not beautiful. Okay, so if I fence my yard, where do the deer go? To my neighbors. We haven't really solved the problem, I think. Same with repellents, which don't seem to work very lastingly.
I guess they have to be reapplied constantly.
That's what we've experienced. They're somewhat effective. But then in the wintertime, when they're destroying the evergreens and so on, you're not out there applying rotten egg solutions to your trees. I mean, typically not. And that's when some of the serious damage is done, just in the landscaping, you know, residential kind of context.
And then there's agricultural losses. I know you said you're no authority on this, so I'll just read
Absolutely
this
not.
that I read from Michigan State University. They found that deer caused up to 43% crop loss in dry beans. I guess that's soybeans. But I did talk to a farmer who was happy to have a lot of deer on her property. She said that she enjoyed having hunters come and getting big bucks on her property. So she said that it's just a cost of doing business in, you know, cost of farming in Michigan. You know you're going to have big losses. So not everybody feels that there should, you know, be deer management.
Well, farmers have some discretion about whether to invite hunters in or not, whether to invite the deer to eat their crops or not.
And then speaking of farming, community gardens, I guess, are a problem. I mean, not a problem, but people want community gardens, and if the deer don't allow them, then the food security of the community is impaired somewhat.
I think we've heard reports that, yes, in some parts of our area here, those gardens are threatened or must be seriously fenced.
So those are some of the different reasons. We should just touch really briefly on ecosystem damage because we have this whole NAP, Natural Areas Preservation, where we're spending a lot of taxpayer money. So could you just briefly address the reasons why? Well, let's just take oaks, for instance. Oaks are a favorite of deer. Why do we need oaks for our ecosystem?
They're the foundation of historically of our forest systems, right? And the deer simply will chomp away at the seedlings, and you no longer see oak trees where the deer browse.
And another thing NAP works on a lot is invasive species. I guess there's that article, the research that's posted on the website that talks about garlic mustard being spread by deer. That's a new one.
It can be spread by deer, yes, and also grows because the other plant species, the tenderer ones, are favorites of the deer and disappear.
So we've gone over some of the reasons why we would want to have a deer management. So,
but on this matter of natural areas and so on, the deer destroy the natural forest ecology, woodland ecology, which means that we lose not only plants but also animal species such as songbirds, because their habitat is gone. So we lose the oaks, we lose the birds, we really lose very precious resources that way.
So in a sense, maybe you're saying that we shouldn't favor one species over another.
That's a basic point, absolutely. Yeah. It seems unwise.
Okay, so if we do decide to do something about it, then we have either non-lethal or lethal options. So let's quickly go through. First, let's talk about non-lethal. Trap and relocate, what's that?
Simply move the deer, catch them and move them somewhere else.
And it's not legal in Michigan, right?
So I understand.
Okay.
It's all for good reason, because they don't survive in very large numbers. It's traumatic to be captured and then to be moved to a new territory. That combination over a year apparently will allow very few of the, I think 15% or so only will survive.
And then there's sterilization. What's that?
Well, the way we spay dogs and cats, there are people who think we can and should limit the deer population with surgical sterilization. You don't have to remove both ovaries and uterus. You can remove just the ovaries. You can also do a tubal ligation as a form of sterilization. Both of these have been tried.
And you still need to trap them, which is traumatic to the deer. So if we're talking about, you know, animal rights type of thing. But one thing I've heard is, one benefit is that once it's done,
Yes.
as opposed to the contraceptives that I want to ask you about. Which
It's a more sterilization is more permanent, absolutely.
What are some of the contraceptives that are being used or tried?
There are just a couple of these substances that have been approved at any level, typically just for experimental use at this time, as far as deer are concerned. One is PZP, one is Gonacon. The PZP makes the eggs inhospitable to the sperm. The Gonacon shuts down the estrus cycle. The deer don't come into heat. So they operate differently. They're both called immunocontraceptives. They work through injecting a substance that causes the reproductive system to manufacture hormones that modify its functioning.
And how are they applied? Do they dart them?
Darting and injecting. Sometimes the dart is used to tranquilize, and then there's an injection. Right. So.
So they need to, I heard they need to get closer. One of the challenges that you need to get closer than you would if you were hunting them.
Yeah, in the major study now that's going on of the PZP contraceptive in Hastings-on-Hudson, New York, they were in the first year of the study recently and succeeded, I think, in darting 8 deer for all their efforts for the whole season. It's difficult, and they're working on better techniques, and some of these, well, both the PZP and the Gonacon require booster shots, so that makes the whole process even more. You don't have to do it once. You have to go back in 2 years, 3 years, whatever, and find the doe. It's always the, you know, with the does we're talking about here, and revaccinate.
So far they're not an option in Michigan, these kind of...
Not an option, except on a very small scale experimental within a fenced area kind of basis, right.
Okay.
They have been tested on islands like Fire Island, New York, and in fenced areas. So they have been tested over a long period of time, actually. Certainly the PZP has. So it's not entirely new, but in all these years it has yet not passed the regulatory hurdles to be widely used. One
of the benefits is that the Humane Society is motivated to develop these kind of things, so they sometimes help defray costs.
Yeah, I think they're strongly motivated to find an alternative to culling, probably an alternative to hunting as well.
And also, like with sterilization, sometimes vets will volunteer their time, because I guess these can be very expensive.
$1,000 or so to capture an animal or to dart an animal and perform surgery in the case of sterilization, or administer a drug. You know, this is not inexpensive.
Okay, so let's talk about lethal means. There's legal challenges in densely populated areas. Something like 450 feet from a residence, you have to be farther away?
Well, if you can get a permit at all, which is not the case in all locations. I mean, if you're in the city of Ann Arbor, it doesn't matter whether you're 450 feet plus from a house, you still can't use a gun. And you can't go archery hunting either. But outside of that, yeah, usually there are ways that you can be permitted hunt within by establishing a safety zone around a house, and generally there's an acreage requirement too.
And sometimes neighbors pool together.
Can pool to get the acreage minimum that applies in that locality, right?
Okay.
Right, they cooperate and do that. So in many areas with going through some hoops, you can invite hunters in or do some sort of managed cull, right?
What about bow and arrow as opposed to firearms?
Well, both methods are used in managed culls as well as hunting, of course. Sportsmen use firearms such as rifles and shotguns, and also bows of various kinds in hunting, and these are also used in more systematic culls where you bait the animals, lure them away from residential housing, and dispatch them with either archery or firearms.
You're mentioning baiting brings up, you hear the debate as to whether or not it should be an efficient, sort of calculated, scientifically performed, with a sharpshooter that, happens quickly and get the whole thing over with, or should it be hunting, which is a cultural tradition where, you know what I'm talking about? There's
right,
a debate.
but in urban areas we don't often. I mean, in the North Woods, I don't think anyone is saying you need to control the population with systematic culls and sort of unsportsmanlike techniques. In a developed area, it's much safer to do not to just give some hunting permits and let people loose with shotguns and bows and arrows, right? It has to be more managed, systematic, and probably use, I don't know, bait, night hunting, whatever, things that sportsmen would typically not be permitted to do.
It seems like in all the areas that I've heard of, Meridian Township, for instance, they use archery.
Volunteer archers, yes.
And they all have to be trained, right?
In most cases where a city or a park system is managing a systematic cull of some kind, they want to vet the people doing it, or they want to hire professional, qualified sharpshooters, or use off-duty policemen that have been trained with firearms, something like that.
And the benefits of archery over firearms are quieter, right?
Yes, certainly, although you can use silencers on some weapons, of course.
But people concerned about animal rights sometimes say it can be less humane because the animal might not die right away.
I've heard that. I think modern bows are make it easier to be accurate and lethal, and archers would take issue with that. But that's a matter of some controversy.
And safety-wise, I guess having them in tree blinds is safer because the trajectory is going down.
In some urban archery situations, it's very common to put the archers up in tree stands, firing down. That's typically what's done, and it's certainly a safety measure. Yes.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, safety is a big concern. Some people say, well, it's it's either there's way fewer people hurt. In fact, have you ever heard of anybody being hurt in one of these kind of situations?
In a managed
yeah.
call, I really haven't. Mm-hmm. Not saying it doesn't exist. I haven't heard it.
Yeah. I do know hunters, it's, they've got to watch out climbing up in the tree stands and all that. There's hunting issues. But, in terms of the community safety, some people say that the car collisions are a greater risk. So that's one thing to look at.
Let's also not give people the idea that if we hunt within a city or if we do a cull within a city, that it's immediately going to be in the densest residential neighborhoods. I don't see this, at least with our current deer population. It's not necessary to do this in the areas with quarter-acre lots. You do this with the larger lots, more on the outskirts of town or along parks and arboretums and botanical gardens and golf courses and so on, or along the river valley in Ann Arbor, for example, where you can lure the deer, where you know, those are the likely sites for an urban cull, rather than initially, certainly in, you know, setting up tree stands in backyards. I would think, but we'll have the experts give us some advice on that, of course.
Well, we're kind of running out of time, but we do need to quickly mention the trap and bolt option. What's that?
If you're in a really dense situation and you can't shoot at something because it's dangerous or you don't want to, there has been a use of the same techniques you would use in a slaughterhouse, which is a bolt gun that stuns the animal with applied directly to the head. You have to trap the animal, and then you dispatch as you would, you know, slaughter beef cattle. It's considered humane by many and safe, but you know, it makes people a little squeamish, I think.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we've pretty much covered all the different, well, not all, but a lot of the main options, not doing anything or doing something. There's really no easy answers. This is all very complex and very difficult for people to try to decide what to do. It's a new science. I mean, you know, the problem of deer overabundance kind of came up in the last, 30 years, and it's just exponentially increasing. So as we learn more, we'll, you know, have better answers, but we just want to point out that there's a lot on the website, wc4eb.org. What are some other resources?
Well, there's a book, Nature Wars, and one called Deerland, which I would recommend.
And the humanesociety.org and deerfriendly.com. So we really have a lot of different great resources to look at, and I'd encourage people to look at what's happening elsewhere, because boy, it's happening all over the country. So Bernie, thank you so much for being here today. It's been really helpful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Barbara.
For an online archive of today's show, go to ewashtenaw.org/greenroom. Thanks for joining us here in the Green Room.